I actually feel like I stumbled into locums. I got interested in med school, which is not very common. I was in kind of a unique program at UW where you traveled around a lot. And so my third year, I was actually moving every 6 weeks to
Yeah,
go to rotations, and I met some locums people there.
right,
And so that's the first time I saw it. And I was like, this is a really cool idea when I retire, or like kind of the end of my
right.
career,
Yeah.
and then completely forgot about it.
Mhm.
And when I was finishing residency, I was stuck in this split of I'm from the West Coast, and that's where all of my family is. And it was, during the pandemic, and I was really feeling like I want to see them more and I want to be around
Right,
them more. But then part of my life is set up out here in New York. My girlfriend's out in New York. And so I was like, how can I try to be around the people I want to be around
right,
more and get both of those things? And so that's really where I started remembering. It's like, oh, you
right,
could do welcomes where you actually split time out West, split time out New York, and
right.
get more flexibility with that. I don't know if I've fully figured it out, to be
Okay,
honest. In
okay.
doing this for a couple years, I know I typically do a little bit of a shotgun, which is I'm looking online, I'm looking on
Right,
their job boards, I'm looking
right.
Google searches. But all of the jobs I have taken have been through working with a locums
Yeah.
agency. And so I usually just speak to as many locum agents as possible to get an idea. I actually tried to do this when I was a fellow. I was working at a hospital, which weirdly enough, I'm working as a locums right now.
Yeah.
I knew that they always needed locums, and I was like, I mean, it must be an extra cost and expense,
Right.
and I know you guys it would make sense, but I haven't been able to do it.
Gotcha.
In my mind, I think it makes sense if there's less kind of logistic things, or if you don't mind putting in the time to handle the logistics.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
I would love to try it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what did not work with your facility? It looks like you tried, you said you didn't work. Is it so like they were not really like responding in a timely manner, or they didn't seem to be interested, or they just simply said no, we don't do
I
that?
think they didn't is either they didn't understand, which means I didn't present it in a way that they
Right.
felt like they could do it, or there was something with the way in which their contracts are set up that it's just
Gotcha.
literally not possible with their policies. I feel like the demand has been way better than anything I expected coming out of
Right.
training. I mean, I literally for start of training, I was like, I want a 7 on, 7 off job somewhere out west that I could go easily home. I could come back to New York when I want. I was able to find that kind of specific job. The next, I was like, I want to work Monday through Friday back in New York, able to find that. The next job that I'm looking for was I want something that's part-time in addiction so that I can, meet up with my girlfriend's schedule and I can do some more addiction work. So I feel like I haven't been doing that,
Right.
able to find that kind of job. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Definitely.
far it's been way more tailorable and like opportunity than I expected. The most demand is inpatient
Okay.
psychiatry. Yeah, like if you're open to doing inpatient psychiatry, there seems to be jobs everywhere for that. There's obviously much more than just that, but there's just a ton of those.
Yeah.
I've worked inpatient psychiatry. I'm going to be doing a partial hospitalization addiction psychiatry job. I've worked in the ER. In Alaska, it was kind of a little bit of everything in that you're a consult, you're ER, but then you're also a bridge clinic. And so you kind of work
Mm,
on getting people connected to the next phase of treatment, which
I
was
see.
kind of like outpatient.
I
And there's
see.
definitely outpatient jobs too. So there's a
Yeah.
lot.
Now, have you worked outpatient yet? Or
I haven't done
okay.
any locums outpatient, but my next job, it's partial hospitalization with some outpatient. So it will have that component.
Right, because of the addiction psychiatry. Yeah, yeah, gotcha. Now, for the inpatient psychiatry jobs you've done, um, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe the typical census, number of cases, type of a community, maybe? Again, maybe hard to just try to put everything into the box, but like what, at least what your experience have been.
For inpatient psychiatry, it's been 8 to 15 patients per
Hmm.
day is the variety I've seen. I mean, it's in a busy kind of like inner city community hospital, city hospital. And so I would say it's definitely a busy kind of probably a little bit more challenging than your average census in some of the more rural hospitals like
Right.
where I've rotated in med school.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that each patient is probably a little bit more complexity, a little bit more time
Right.
than those settings. But they also have extra services to, I think, help you out with that.
I see.
Um, What about I would say 10 to 12 is kind of the
The
norm.
average.
I
Right.
think that there is probably typically more opportunities the more you're willing to get out of a highly
Mm,
desirable city.
gotcha.
Um, I, I don't know if this is partially related to COVID and
Right.
a lot of demographic changes and challenges that are going on right now, but there has been a lot of need in New York City, at least,
Gotcha.
which is the only real city I've been trying to
Right.
get with. Other than that, definitely a lot of jobs that, they want you to travel to some town in Maine
Right.
that's hard to recruit to. This job,
Gotcha.
the pay rate, that is I feel like the black box of locums.
Yes. Yes.
No one really tells you. The recruiters always try to get you to tell them like what's
The
the pay
lowest.
rate you're looking for before they
Right.
tell you like
Right.
what they're actually
Right.
providing. And so it can be very hard to know. My first contract, I did not try to negotiate at all.
Hmm.
They offered 210 an hour.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, and I mean, that was so much more coming out of residency than
Right.
I had ever been paid or ever expected to be paid. And so I
Right.
was just ecstatic. Um,
Right.
I've seen jobs for sure, depending on, obviously a lot of factors, but in psychiatry, which I think is surprising, close, $300 an
Right.
hour,
Right.
is probably the max. I know you sent a job that I think was even
Right.
more than that, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, 250 to 300 seems to be the typical
Okay.
max for most jobs that don't seem too malignant, at least.
Right.
Um, I would say more commonly 200 to 250 is probably the range that
Gotcha.
I think is
So,
the typical.
so, so I guess the inpatient side would be typically paying higher, right? The inpatient psychiatry. Hourly, I'm talking about hourly pay rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So in general, it looks like the pay range is anywhere from 200 to $300 an hour, like the more of a wide range, right?
That's what I'm seeing. And then at the same time, I have a friend who just jumped into locums, and I I think some companies pay a little bit less, and
Yeah.
I talked to him about it, and he ended up with 180 an hour,
Yeah.
working not that differently at a job that I ended up with
Right.
250 an hour. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned over time, that has helped me is the more information you can get, the more kind of leverage you have in the negotiation. If I've talked to because there were times where I talked to a bunch of recruiters and they're telling me that this is the pay rate that they're seeing for these type of jobs, I can go back to whatever I'm negotiating. It's like, this is what they're offering. And you actually have a little bit more of a leverage than like the first job. I didn't have any
Yeah.
information per se on the hourly rate. And so when they say it, it's like, well, that's more than what my expectation was. And you don't have any real leverage to push for a number that you have in your mind. And so I think the more recruiters you talk to and the more data you can get at the time of when you're signing a contract of what kind of rates you're seeing, has been helpful for me. And also in doing that, trying to ask them instead of just, because I think a lot of recruiters try to tell you like what kind of rate are you looking for? What are
Yeah.
you looking for?
Right.
And they try to make you put it out there. But if
Right.
instead of you telling them this is the rate I'm looking for, it's like, what kind of rate have you been paying your doctors? What kind of rate, are you seeing for this kind of work and these kind of jobs? To where they may be giving you numbers that, you at least have an idea. And if they give you something that's way out of proportion to what you hear, you can be like, well, these are the rates I'm hearing at other jobs. And it's amazing how quickly they might change the numbers that they
Yeah.
have all of a sudden. Once you have more information, you have, I think people, they know that they can't,
Right.
manipulate as much.
Or
Or
take advantage of the situation.
the biggest pro for me was always flexibility and control of my schedule. And that's included being able to take a month off at different points to go do some stuff. It's included able to try to work out west to see my family when I want, to
Right.
work out in New York when I want. That's being able to change my schedule for, the next 6 months, where my girlfriend's schedule is very inverted to a normal schedule. And so I get
Yeah.
to move my schedule around so that I
Gotcha.
can accommodate it to life. So I think that's been a big part of it. And then the other part of it is the amount of learning coming out of training. I was just talking to one of my good friends where I think it can be easy to get into a comfortable situation and kind of narrow your
Right.
scope of practice. As soon as you leave training, it's like,
Right.
I've been bouncing around, I've been having to do all this stuff and get comfortable. But I think locums, it forces you to still keep that kind of resident mindset where you're jumping into new environments and you're learning so like each assignment I've learned
Yeah,
so much about I mean the culture of medicine, the culture of a hospital, the culture of the laws that impact psychiatry, the the actual work in psychiatric
definitely.
care. Like it's so each thing I think I've it's just so much more I'm learning each time that I jump into these. I would say one thing that's probably true. I'm still too early in this, but there's usually a reason systems need to find locums. It's not
Right,
their first answer, right? And so usually there's some underlying challenges that you're jumping into
right,
that
right,
I think I naturally am at least somewhat inclined to dealing with that. And so it
right.
doesn't get under my skin too often, but it definitely is, it's a real challenge is you have to jump into a new environment that probably is having a trouble keeping psychiatrists for me for some reason, whether that's the location that it is, whether that's the culture that it has, whether that's the overarching job
Patient
market.
population or something like that.
Yeah, like there's usually something. And so you have to be willing to put up with some of those challenges. Um, I think that's probably the biggest thing. There's also obviously just so much paperwork,
Right,
credentialing, licensing, just that you have to constantly keep up. Thankfully for psychiatry, I've been fortunate enough, and the way that I'm structuring it is I'm not taking super short-term jobs.
right,
Like the shortest I'm doing is 6 months, and
right,
so I think it doesn't make it so much of a problem. But it's a big chunk of time. Every new
right,
hospital you go to, you have to
right.
do a million credentialing things,
Yeah,
Epic
yeah,
or whatever EMR training,
right,
um, all of all of their onboarding trainings that it just takes a lot of time and a lot of that's not enjoyable.
for
It's
sure.
so I think the longer your contracts are, the less that is a problem for locums. But if
Right.
someone was wanting to do like really short-term frequent contracts, I imagine that would be more of a burden. It's interesting that no one I really knew was doing locums before I jumped into
Hmm.
locums. And as I've been doing it, I see a lot more people, especially in
Yeah,
psychiatry, that are going into it. Um,
absolutely.
and I think handling all of the benefits, business side aspect of locums, I hear as a huge problem from other people. And I think that that is something that is actually less of a problem from my experience than people think it is. Like finding health insurance, finding retirement
Right,
planning, doing a lot of these things that people think is this black box of like
right,
impossibility of jumping into locums.
right.
I just hear it from so many people that they're worried about it, but it's actually been not that big of an issue for me. Advice for psychiatrists, I trying to think, so I've talked to a lot of different psychiatrists about jumping into locums, and I think that it is a really good fit for a lot of people. Um, I think the more that you know about what you're looking for and the strengths of yourself, I think will help people make a better decision if locums is
Great
right for
advice.
them. Because there's some people where I'm like, absolutely do locums. I think you're gonna love it. And
Hmm.
some people I'm like, I honestly, I don't know.
Right,
You
right,
might
right.
kind of like what I was saying, you're jumping into a lot of situations that can be
Yeah,
challenging and a little bit chaotic. There's less stability, there's changing job, there's all of these things that are very much uh, they don't bother me, right? Or at least I'm someone who I'm somewhat used to that kind of stuff. I grew up with five brothers and
oh wow.
like used to a little bit of a maybe
Right,
hectic and moving and change to where I enjoy it for the most part. And so I think the more you can really think of why do I want to do locums, and there's a lot of strengths to locums, and I think I touched on some of them. Obviously, financial independence, flexibility, opportunity to learn from a lot of different things, variety.
yeah,
So there's a lot of good reasons, but I would just say really distill if you want to do locums, like make sure that you're doing locums for reasons that are going to be good and
yeah,
keep eyes open to the drawbacks
right,
and make sure it's something that you're okay doing. If you're like there are some people I know who are very much like I want to like move my way up a ladder in a big corporation or
right,
hospital system. It's
right,
like locums, I'm sure there's a way you could justify it and it
right.
could be helpful for you, but generally speaking, that's probably not the right path to do that. So I guess I'm someone who asks a lot of questions and maybe is a little bit analytic. So I don't really jump into things so much, even
Okay,
though locums moving around. Like I get a lot of information. And so I think it was what I think was helpful for me was that I did talk to a lot of people. Like I got you as coaching
right,
before locums. And I think it's hard to find people that are doing locums, but the more people you can talk to, to get an idea, I would say don't jump into it blindly.
Right.
Um, and I don't think that I did. But probably just that the more information you can get, the
Right.
more people you can talk to, because it's a non-traditional path,
Right.
and there are definitely downsides. So um, I don't know if I would have done this differently, but the more I could
Yeah.
have got information about what the
Gotcha.
downsides were, like to have prevented that problem, that
Right.
first shift, be more prepared for that. Things
Right.
like that, where I would have been able to prepare myself better to be in a place where it's not so stressful and
Right.
challenging, like
Right.
having had real EMR training before,
Right.
like transfer
Orientation, actual full normal
actual
orientation.
orientation of
Yeah.
where's the
Even a
hospital.
few hours would have made your that day, at least that day, definitely like
It's so much
99% less stressful.
yeah, like that kind of stuff. I wish I would have, if I would have talked
Yeah.
to someone,
Right.
about what I was doing. It's like I
Right.
just worked at a
Right.
hospital knowing nothing. So that
Right.
kind of stuff where people that have gone through this before you, they know a lot of things that you don't know.
Gotcha.
I
Gotcha.
wish in ways I could have done that better.